just briefly, why do you love children so much?
It'd be good to know these questions before.
Yeah, sorry.
I don't know. It seems like I've always been able to establish a good relationship with children. They seem to want to come to me, usually. I worked all of my life in some way with children, with orphans, in public schools, in camps, all my life in some way. I guess most of my life I've done some kind of mission work or ministry outreach, and I think that one of the best things we can do in ministry outreach is to work with young people.
Yeah.
Because it's how we work with people in our churches. We don't start teaching them when they're 18 or 20. We start teaching them when they're 2 in our homes. And I think we need to do the same thing in mission work and in outreach, ministry outreach in our community. Because if you begin working with the child when they're very young, and if you maintain relationship with them as they grow, then you have a very good opportunity to be an influence in their life when they're 18 or 20. But you can't start when they're 18 or 20 and expect to have that kind of influence on their life. And you just have to look at this kind of work as a marathon, not a sprint.
Okay.
I don't know. That's maybe the best way I can answer the question.
What motivated you to start working with orphans in Ukraine? Where did it come from?
I first worked in camps in Ukraine, and a lot of the orphans I worked with came to the camps we were doing in the early days. And then I began visiting some of them where they live in the orphanage, and finding out the conditions they have there, as well as the problems they have when they have to leave the orphanage at 18 years old and they have nothing and no one to support them at that time.
So motivation for you was to be kind of help to them. You saw their need. You felt you have some kind of special feelings for kids in that sense?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. We established a center. Typically, when children leave the orphanage in Ukraine, they go to a trade school to learn how to be an electrician or a welder or something they can do with their hands. But they live in a dormitory with other teenagers who have parents, and these kids don't have parents and no one to teach them the right way in life. So at the center, they could come live while they're going to trade school, live with Christian people that they already know from the camps. And it helped many of them. I have a picture of one of them. He was about 8 or 9 in the camp, and he is surrounded with his friends who are other orphans. And I keep that in my living room because that 8 or 9-year-old boy is now almost a 30-year-old man who is married to one of the other orphans we worked with, and they have their own 2 children, and they're both leaders in the church in Kiev. And so it was a reminder to me that you never know what God is going to do with the little small things you do for someone, and especially when you do it with children and young people. Those seeds are going to grow, and they're going to produce fruit later on.
That's true. So bringing Christ to the children is a very important task.
Yeah.
Why would you say that?
I would reverse it, bringing children to Jesus. Jesus said that himself. He said, "Let them come to me. Don't keep them from me." He said that the kingdom of God belongs to ones like this. And he said, in fact, to us adults, he said, in order to enter the kingdom, you've got to become like a little child. And come to me like a little child. In humbleness, in gentleness, in trust. In all those ways, a child comes to their parents.
So in Ukraine, you work mostly with orphan kids. But when you came to Croatia, now you are working with kids who do have parents. And some of them have good Christian parents. Some maybe don't have Christian parents. But here you work with children that do have homes, that do have family. So how you can contribute to these kids?
I think we have a saying in America that it takes a village to raise a child. And I think there are possibly some things I can offer, maybe not that the parents can't, but in a different way. Especially when kids become teenagers, sometimes they don't want to listen to mom and dad. Mom and dad don't know anything, you know. I heard someone say once, the older I get, the smarter my parents get. And well, that's not true. It just means you realize more and more how smart your parents really are. And they do know what they're talking about life. But I think as kids become teenagers, especially, sometimes someone who's not their parents has an opportunity to develop a different kind of relationship with them, and they're able to say something into that child's life that maybe their parents can't during the teenage years especially. But as I said, in order to have that kind of a relationship with teenagers, you got to start building that with them when they're younger, so that when they are teenagers, they have a level of trust and relationship with you that they would want to come to you with different problems or different questions that they have that maybe they don't feel comfortable in talking to mom and dad about.
So you like working with Croatian kids?
Yeah.
Champs Camp and the things you do here for the kids have that purpose of just sharing them, bringing them, making them feel like a good community. And
yes. And I love the way that how Champs Camp has developed that, it seems like many of the children want to keep being involved in that year after year. And even now, a lot of the children that are too old for it and that are teenagers, they want to stay involved in helping to make the camp happen. And as we see that happening more, then we have a real opportunity with those teenagers to show them the ways of Jesus and to give input into their life about what's the proper way to live and what does God expect of us and those kind of things.
What would you suggest to Croatian parents what to do with their children? How to?
I think a main suggestion I would have is don't be too concerned about being your children's friend. Children need their parents. They have enough friends. They need their parents to be parents. They need their parents to provide discipline, to provide structure, to provide boundaries for them. Typically, in my experience working in schools, I was a psycholog in schools. I found when a child is misbehaving and is acting out in a way that's begging their parents to provide structure and boundaries for them. When a child has structure and boundaries, they feel secure. When they don't have that, they don't know what to do with themselves. They don't know how to behave. They don't know what is right and what's wrong. But when parents provide those structure and those boundaries and that discipline, it provides that security for that child. And so many times when you have a child that's misbehaving and acting out, it's a cry for mom and dad, hey, I need more of this. And I think that's an important thing for parents in any culture. And I would say the second thing is let your children learn from their mistakes when they're young, when the consequences of their mistakes are not very costly. For example, let's say the child's at school. I don't know exactly how it works here. It's probably different than in the U.S., but in my experience as a counselor in schools in the U.S., child would forget their lunch or forget their clothes for the athletics class, or they would forget their homework. And mom and dad would come run, and every time, and run and bring it to school. Well, what that does, you think you're being kind for the child, but what that does, the child is not allowed to learn from their mistakes then. And the reality is when you forget your homework or your lunch or something, that the consequences of those mistakes are very small. And probably they miss their lunch once and go hungry one day and they won't make that mistake again. And no one's going to starve from missing one meal. But let's say they're 25, 30 years old, and they don't turn in assignment for their work when they're supposed to. The consequences for that mistake are a lot more serious at that time. And at that time, mom and dad are not there to bail them out. So let your children learn from their mistakes by suffering the natural consequences of them when they're smaller, when those mistakes are, when the consequences are not as costly as when they're older, and when you won't be there to bail them out.
This is really good. I will ask you a last question, and that's about. Well, I assume this, but you have established special relationship with Melchior.
Yeah.
And I know that he really appreciates you, and you appreciate him. And how did you manage to work with him and all of that?
That was done through lots of time. For many years, Melchior and I had Bible class together, just the two of us. When the kids would have Bible class, the Sunday school, he and I would have our own, especially as he got older. And then we often, even now, meet each other for coffee. In the earlier days, it was more like teacher and student, and now he's 20 years old, and now it's more of an equal kind of thing. Yes, there's still ways I mentor Melchior and give input into his life, but because I began working with him at a very young age, and then was consistent in working with him, it's very easy for to accept that advice and mentoring for me, and it doesn't feel unnatural, and it doesn't feel forced, like I'm forcing it on him. In fact, many times he'll ask for it. I don't know if he'll be in church on Sunday, and this may embarrass him, I don't know, but but you can ask him too, and ask him what was this like for him. That's an important thing to ask him too, and see if he says the same thing. So, and I think it's important to in working with kids to get their perspective, because adults, we've lived a lot more of life, and we have an answers to a lot of their questions, but we can learn some things from kids too.
Yes.
And I would say also it's important as anyone working with children, whether you're a parent or whether you're maybe like me, a substitute parent or something like that. I think it's important to give discipline and clear boundaries with your kids, but at the same time, be able to admit to your kids when you're the one that's wrong, and ask their forgiveness when you have been wrong or when you've said something that hurts them.
This is good.
Because yes, they're kids, and we need to show them the right way and give them discipline and structure, but they're also people that need our respect as well. And if we give that respect to them, that goes a long way in getting their respect for us as well. At the same time that we provide those very clear boundaries and structure and discipline for them.